are good to go. Good evening, social media. We'll start the music here and let everybody into the Zoom room.
And Keith.
Contact with the family and hopes the rest don't be possible.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for Veterans Breakfast Club Greatest Generation Live. This is a continuation of our Masters of the Air series for Thursday, April 11th. It's great to see you all. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the VBC. For those of you new to us, our mission is creating communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. You can find us online at VBC, or not VBC, but veteransbreakfastclub.org, and check out everything that we have going on. We're usually on Monday nights with our Scuttlebutt program, but we've been really enjoying these Thursday night programs. And with me, as always, is Glenn Flickinger. Glenn, how are you doing this evening? I'll ask you to unmute.
Go. We good?
How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you very much. Soggy. Just a little
Yeah.
soggy.
A little soggy here in Western PA, or quite soggy, as we should say. But excited for tonight's program, which honestly, it can't really happen without the listeners and the viewers here tonight. We've been doing this since 2008, and our programs connect, heal, educate, and inspire, and they are only made possible by your support. And you can, like I said, you can go to our website and you can donate to the Veterans Breakfast Club, as we say in the nonprofit world, to help us keep the lights on. So be nice to gain your support and have you here in the room with us. As always, Glenn, I'm going to hand it off to you. I'll chime in later on with a station break, but welcome back.
Okay, thank you. It's great to be back, and welcome everybody to another program of Greatest Generation Live, where we're continuing the theme of Masters of the Air. Although the TV series ended a few weeks ago, we continue. And we'll probably continue for another 4 or 5 programs. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a board member of the Veterans Breakfast Club, and I've been hosting these Greatest Generation Live programs for 4 years now, going on 4 years. And we've, again, focused on Masters of the Air for obvious reasons since December, when we first interviewed Don Miller. And one of the sub-themes we've come up with in this Masters of the Air series is the POW experience, which, frankly, I did not know all that much about before we started interviewing different experts in the field. And tonight, we have again with us one of the foremost experts in the field, and that's Marilyn Walton, who's been with us several times before. Say hello, Marilyn.
Hello.
Good.
Good to see everybody.
Yeah. So Marilyn is an author. I'll show you some of the books she's written here in a second. And she was one of the technical experts, historians for Masters of the Air. Worked with John Orloff quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And her father was a POW, which is, I guess, the source of all your interest in this.
Yes, he was. And over the years, I was really blessed to know many of those prisoners who were, almost all of them are gone now. But I've been doing this for about 20 years, and I gradually met them at reunions and met Pam and Carolyn and all these. And we Stala Glue 3 people are a very tight community. We have, these are my sisterhood. 2 of my sisters are right here. Yes. And we are very supportive of each other. And I write a newsletter that goes to hundreds and hundreds of people. And over the years, I've gotten to know so many of them, even if it's just by email. Yeah. They're all really good people, and they support the museum in Poland.
It's a wonderful community of people. And what's been wonderful for me in this process is I've met several sort of communities of veteran people, the 100th Bomb Group Association, the 96 Bomb Group Association, all those associations that are out there, and keeping these memories alive, which is So let's introduce to Carolyn Miller. Carolyn, say hello, please.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And it's
Hi.
Carolyn Clark Miller, as in the
Hi.
daughter of General Clark.
Right. My dad was the first American pilot shot down after the U.S. entered the war, July 26, 1942. And very, very sadly for him, it was his first mission. He was flying a British airplane, a Spitfire, in the slot position in a flight of 4, and the Germans engaged, and he was hit, and the airplane went into a spin. When he recovered from the spin, he learned that he'd lost his compass and his altimeter. He saw land, and
Carolyn, if I could ask you to hold off, we're going
Sure.
to tell the story here once
Okay.
we get
Sure.
started, okay?
Mhm.
So let me introduce our next guest, and that's Pam Whitelock. Hello, Pam Whitelock.
Yes, yes.
So
Pam-
our apologies for misspelling your name,
Oh,
our
It's
announcement.
very, very common. As I said, when my maiden name was Sconyers, my uncle is my daddy's brother, is the one who was the prisoner of war, though my dad served too. But as I shared with you, when you have a last name of Sconyers, mispronunciations are very common.
You ought to try Flickinger in Portuguese in
Oh,
Brazil. Never, no way, it never happened right.
can imagine.
But thank you all three for being with us tonight. This is, I think, gonna be-
Pleased to be here.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
So let me share my screen, and we've created this PowerPoint, as all our regular guests know that I like to use these PowerPoints as a way to structure the program so that everybody can follow the story. And I think you're going to find this just a fascinating story once I get it up here correctly and everybody can see what we've got. Okay. Everybody seeing that okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So Marilyn, I just want to pay homage to you in that these are 3 of your books.
Mhm.
And just wanted to put these up here. A couple of our members have told me they have read these books of late. Chad Riddle. I think, Chad, I'm not sure if you're on tonight. Maybe a little bit later we'll recognize you. He told me he just finished From Interrogation to Liberation and loved it.
That's the big one. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's the one that weighs 4.5 pounds.
Yes.
And that is the one that John Orloff used the most of our books. He had that other book when I went back to Germany. Mike Eberhardt and I did a book. He's involved with the big book as well, certainly. And From Commandant to Captain, we did von Lindiner. We've done several books, and he had them all. And he read through the first one very quickly and took a lot out of that, he told me. And I saw it on his desk, and it had all kinds of Post-it notes on it. So I knew that he really read it.
And we're going to have John Orloff on next week.
But I heard. Yeah,
So,
that's what I heard.
we
Yeah.
can,
I started working with him in 2017.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time.
Whoops, let me figure out how to get the page moving here. There we are. Now this is Glenn Clark's father's book. 33 months as a POW in Stalag Luft 3. And we're going to get into the story, Carolyn. I just wanted to show people the book and urge them to buy it, to get it, read it, get it from their library, whatever. When did your father publish this book, Carolyn?
I'm not exactly sure when it was, but it was probably about 5 years before he died, which was in 2010. Yeah, I guess I can look in the front of it and see.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2004. He published it in 2004.
So, yeah, this is along with Marilyn's book there on interrogation. This is another one I'm definitely going to get to read.
It's excellent. It's just excellent. I can really highly recommend it.
Yeah.
And I was blessed that he gave me a copy and signed it and wrote a note to me in the one I have.
And then for Pam Whitelock, there's not a book, but there is an award-winning documentary on
Yes.
her uncle, Ewart Sconyers. Am I going to pronounce it right?
Yes,
tonight?
Sconyers.
Sconyers.
Yes.
Sconyers.
Mhm.
So remind me now, he was your father's brother, is that?
Older brother. Yes, he was his
older
older brother. Mhm.
And this documentary I watched the other day was just tear-jerking.
Yes.
Came out in what, 2017, 18?
Yes, they won the award in 2019, but they worked on it a couple of years. Jennifer Holton and Kai Sisson were the two incredible journalists who had followed the story. They began interviewing me in Panama City, Florida, and followed our journey quite extensively.
So the story tonight is not only the story of these two men's service, and they're being captured and being POWs, but also it's the story about finding Ewart Sconyers' remains after the war, because you'll see here in just a minute that he did not survive his POW experience, and we're going to explain that. So just a little bit of background on General Clark, Albert Patton Clark, which Marilyn the other day assured me, Carolyn, that it is not related to the General Patton.
There may be some distant relationship. There's been some discussion about that. A woman who was related to Patton contacted my father, but it's not a direct connection.
Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to give just a bit of background so people could put it into context. West Point graduate, among the first to serve in England, and shot down, as Carolyn said before, in July of 42. And he stays in the military and becomes the superintendent of the Air Force Academy. And as you can see, they only let handsome men into the.
We've noticed that.
I suppose it was a requirement, because here's another handsome guy. Ewart Sconyers volunteered for the U.S. Army Air Force.
Yes, he was one of the original University of Florida Fighting Gators.
Ah, okay. And wanted to become a pilot, doesn't make it as a pilot, but he does become a bombardier. And
Yes.
we're going to tell his story here just in a second here. We're going to walk through both men's war experience. Okay. And tragedy, he's one of the few men that died in captivity in the Stalags. And the story becomes how his remains are found after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the documentary is mostly about.
Yes.
And I'd urge, the other day when I watched it, I was like, geez, maybe I had to just play the documentary tonight and, not bother blabbing on about it all, because the documentary is so good. So good. Okay. So we're going to start with this picture. That is who, Pamela?
That is Uncle Ewart with his wife, Babel. And I will quickly say she is a remarkable person in and of herself, though she has passed away. But she was the first female pharmacist at Auburn University. And as she told me, because Ewart loved to fly so much, when he was missing, she, did not know for 11 years that, the case, they had decided he was unrecoverable, but she had to learn to fly. So she took up flying for the Civil Air Patrol and did that for 2 years, and ultimately was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal for her service there with the Civil Air Patrol.
Wow. And this picture obviously taken just before
Yes.
Ewart left.
Not long after their wedding, yes.
Okay. And then just to start the story of Albert Clark, it's always easy to identify Albert. He's always the tallest guy in the picture.
Yep. He was 6'4".
6'4". Wow.
Right.
And back in those days, that was really a tall man, too.
It was.
Yeah.
Not only that, but he had flaming red hair. So.
So
He was-
this is him in what, a Canadian uniform?
No, he was in flight training at Kelly Field.
Flight training. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And when did he join the well, actually, I'm sure he was a West Point graduate. That's right.
He went right from West Point into flight training.
Okay. Okay. So this would have been taken in 38, 37 sort of time frame.
Probably 37, because he graduated in 36.
Yeah.
He passed the test. He was very, very excited about joining the Air Corps. And there was a rigorous test, which he passed and was delighted.
And how was it that he becomes one of the first U.S. airmen to reach England and be in a fighter group?
They after Pearl Harbor, he knew that he was going to be sent. He spent months traveling around and ferrying aircraft. They thought they were going to send the aircraft from New Orleans, but as it turned out, the aircraft were sent to the West Coast because they believed that the Japanese were going to again start shooting up the West Coast. So he went over on a ship with his compatriots, and they were sent to an RAF base, and he was the group commander. They did not have any of the American aircraft over there, so they gave him a Spitfire and told him to start flying it, which he did, and then was shot down on his first mission, which he considered the greatest mistake of his life.
And this is actual Spitfire that was shot. That's it.
With the Germans crawling all over it.
This is July 1942.
Right, July 26th.
Okay, and do we know much about how he was shot down? Just in a dogfight with German?
A dogfight. He was in the slot position of the flight floor, which is the most vulnerable position. And the three pilots that were flying with him were British. When they saw that he was in trouble, they believed that he was going into in fact, they reported back to my mother that he was seen crashing into the channel in flames. But that was not what happened. He did see a bit of land, prayed that it was England, because at that point he had no compass and no altimeter. He could not get out of the cockpit because the cockpit was jammed. So he crash landed on the beach in France. And when he saw German helmets coming up over the hill, he knew that the war was over for him.
Wow. Obviously fortunate to have survived that experience. And early in the war, he must have been among the first American POWs taken, or right?
There were a number of American POWs in the camp already. They had been flying with the RAF and were in what was called the Eagle Squadron. They were essentially no longer flying for the U.S. They were flying for England. And some of them had been there for over a year by the time he got there.
There were quite a few. There's a great book by Alex Kershaw called The Few. And in that case, he's referring to the few Americans who flew for the RAF. I highly recommend that book. Alex Kershaw, The Few. And then here's the telegram that your grandparents received.
My mother, we were all living with my grandparents at that point. My grandfather was a colonel stationed at Fort Sam Houston. So we were living in the quarters with my grandparents.
So you were how old at this point, Pamela, if I may ask that?
I think you're talking to Carolyn.
Carolyn, I'm sorry. Carolyn.
Well, let's see. I was 4,
War. Okay.
3.5, 3.5. I wasn't 4 yet.
So too young, the point I was trying to get to, too young to have any memories of this.
Oh, I had memories of my father. I was very, very attached to my father.
Even at this point in your life, at this,
Yes.
I mean, yeah. Okay. Wow.
And when I first saw him 4 years later, I was sure that I would recognize him, but I didn't.
Yeah. Another handsome picture. This one, an unfortunate one. This is his German prisoner ID.
Mhm.
Those are the clothes he arrived in from Dulagluff interrogation. And I mentioned to Glenn that you never know what you were going to get as far as what you were going to wear. Several people got great coats from France with blood stains on them. Some men got women's blouses. You never knew what it was going to be, but you just had that. Some were lucky enough to keep their jackets and whatever, but those pictures on those cards are really interesting to look at. There's quite a variety that they wore.
Yeah. And I'm beginning to learn, Marilyn, from last week with Les Schrenk and the other readings that you guys have sent me. All prisoners, when they were captured, were taken to, what do you call it? Dulag Luft.
Dulag Luft.
For interrogation.
Yeah. Yeah, it was several parts to it. That was the evaluation center, they called it, where they were interrogated. And you saw that in Masters in the Air in the tiny cell. I thought they were going to show the whole cell, but there was that one little snippet and you couldn't see the window. There's not much of a window behind it. But they were all taken there, whether they were officers or enlisted. Yeah. And they were there usually average 3-4 days. It depended what year of the war they went down. The British, they had interrogated all the British first, and then the Americans started coming in. So, but they all went through. It was in Oberrussel, Germany, near Frankfurt.
Yeah. And so then he is quickly assigned to Stalag Luft 3.
An interesting little incident that happened on the train from France to Dulag. It was dark. They had the shades down, and he was sitting in a seat. And at some point, a woman got up and put her baby on his lap. As she, so he was sitting on that train on the way to Dulag with a baby on his lap.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Oh, not exactly the feeling like a POW at that point, I suppose. But,
no, I imagine maybe they didn't realize that he was an American going to the prison camp.
Yeah.
Later, they had the prison trains. They all took him, but he was so early. He went down so early. They had him on a passenger train.
Right.
So when he arrives at Stalag Luft 3 so early in the war, in August or so of 42, it was mostly British prisoners at that point.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And he made friends almost immediately with the big shot whose name I can't remember right now.
Roger Bushell.
Roger Bushell.
Yeah.
And because he had been trained in the coding and many of the secret things that they were going to be doing to help the POWs, he and Roger Bushell bunked together and started working on a security process in order to make sure that there was very strong security in the camp.
And we're going to get in a little bit, just a touch on the Great Escape story and his relationship to that a little bit later. Okay. So let's jump to Lieutenant Sconiers, and this is his first plane. Do I have that correct?
Yes, Johnny Reb.
Johnny Reb.
Yes, he as you had said, he wanted to be a pilot, but he had peripheral vision problems and could not land a plane well. So he decided to become a bombardier. He finished in March of 42 and shipped out to Polbrook in England in May of 42.
So he's a pretty early arrival for the 8th Air Force at that time. Yeah.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, right in the worst of it, you know.
Yes,
I'm guessing this is him here. Do I have that right?
yes,
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
yes.
And then the fascinating story is how he
Yes.
wins the Distinguished Service Cross in,
Yes.
was it August of 42?
Yes, August the 21st, which is a significant date, isn't it, Marilyn?
Yes, it is.
It was the third daylight raid. It was there was an attack on a shipyard in Rotterdam, Holland, and a cannon shell from an FW-190 hit the plane and killed the co-pilot, Lieutenant Walker, and injured the pilot, Lieutenant Sparks. And Ewart went up front and, of course, had never flown that plane before, but brought it safely back to England and saved the rest of the crew, which was pretty remarkable. And the newspaper though my father and grandmother did not discuss any of this, it was much too painful. My sisters and I were privy to all of the newspaper articles and all of the memorabilia that she had tucked away in her cedar chest.
Yeah.
And one of the remarkable things was a fellow who had flunked out because he couldn't land a plane, landed it, as they observed, without a bounce. That's what they said.
And he landed in my father's bomb group, the 458th. I didn't know that for a while, but when he landed, he was at my dad's bomb group.
Oh my goodness.
He didn't
And that's
get
an AP Associated Press interview. That's a picture of the Associated Press interview.
Yeah. And taken by a rather famous reporter, right? The female, famous World War II. Am I getting this wrong? World War II female correspondent?
I'd have to look in my files. I don't.
I forget her name too, but she was famous. I remember seeing her name.
Yeah.
I picked him out to interview.
Yeah, it was in something one of you had sent me. It just,
Yeah.
I just love the intense look on his face here.
Yes, describe, and all the newspaper articles, quote him in terms of what they went through in the plane. And I think it was Walter Cronkite's son. Anyway, one of the leading reporters at that time, they refurbished the plane, although it couldn't work anymore, couldn't be used anymore in actual warfare. It was used in training, and particularly training journalists. And he actually sat in the seat he was in, which was pretty amazing.
Well, just imagine the emotions, the adrenaline going through him at this time for that experience.
I can't.
It's hard to imagine. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And those pictures, I knew that's what started my journey, was finding that in the bookstore or in the gift shop at the Air Force Museum in Dayton. I knew my family had never seen those pictures and what it would have meant to my father. They had pictures of the burial, though they thought those were fake, but the plane they had never seen. And I got quite emotional in the middle of and my friends who were with me were, of course, questioned all the way back to our home, tell us about it. And when I got home, they said, have you ever Googled him? And no, I hadn't, but I did.
I began your
And destiny decided it's time to learn some things.
And this is him being awarded the
Distinguished Service Cross, yes.
For that rather remarkable achievement. Okay. And
Margaret Bork White was the woman. Someone just flashed it up. She was the one.
Thank you. The name was on the tip of my cranium. And I knew Margaret. I couldn't get the rest of it out. Yeah. famous World War reporter. Yeah. Female. Meanwhile, back at Stalag Luft 3, here was he? What was his rank when he first was shot down? Was he a?
He was a major.
Major.
And they must have promoted him while he was in the camp.
Yeah.
He's obviously showing explaining how he was shot down. His hands are in position of showing how he was flying.
Going this way, and he went that way, and boom.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Do we know who these others are in the picture?
Yes, they're on the bottom of the picture, but I don't have the picture in front of me, and I don't know who they are.
Yeah. That's okay. I just curious. And I was captivated by this picture because when I first looked at it, I'm like, what? How'd they get women? But those aren't women. Those are men.
Oh,
Yep.
for the plays. Oh my gosh.
That's East Compound when they were so early. He was in East for a while. That was the first one. And on the left there is a Doolittle Raider, J.V. Jones.
This
Right.
fellow right
Right.
here with the beard and the kerchief. Yeah.
Yes.
That's Davy Jones.
Davy Jones, who was a Doolittle Raider, who then was shot down I guess in a B-17 early in the war.
Right.
I'm not sure. He was there really early too. I forget which one. Well, he got there, I think, after Lieutenant Colonel Clark did.
Yes.
But probably not by a whole lot. I mean, he was down real early too.
They were very good friends.
So Marilyn, I'm a little so these men are POWs, yet they still receive promotions from the U.S. Army Air Force while
Quite
they're
a few of them did. They were unaware until the commandant came and told them they'd been promoted, or they might have earned some kind of a medal, and frequently the medals were presented at the camp. I was surprised to know that too. They just kept processing the papers, and evidently probably through the Red Cross, they got the announcements and they would tell the prisoners. And they also took classes in the camp and even law school classes, and they went through the curriculum, and when they would get their grades back, that all went through the camp, and it's surprising. It was like a little school there for a while.
And this shot also really hit me. I'm like, wait a second, are they prisoners of war, or are they just out? Was this taken before the war and they're out on some adventure? But
No, I've never seen this picture before.
This was the parole. They had to give their parole, and this was only very early when the camp didn't have as many prisoners in it. And from time to time, to get them outside the barbed wire, as long as they were on their best behavior, they would take them out to there's a little local restaurant I have a picture of. They went there. Sometimes they would go have beer somewhere, or they go in the restaurant, or they take them out. This is a picture in a boat where they went out somewhere. This isn't that far from the camp. And they continued that until there were really a lot of prisoners in the camp, and they just couldn't do it anymore. And they tried to rotate different officers to go out on parole walks from time to time, but soon there was just so many of them that they couldn't do it anymore. But the prisoners enjoyed it being out.
My dad mentioned that the Germans treated the pilots and those that were involved in aircraft better than they treated the other prisoners. They had some kind of, the Germans really admired the pilots.
And that's to Hermann Goering, who'd been a pilot in World War I, and he had a real camaraderie with pilots in general. And a lot of that kind of behavior, I think, came through him, actually.
So until the Great Escape, when the Great Escape happened, they cracked down and changed, started treating them much harsher, much more harshly.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the Ewart Sconier story. His B-17 is shot down in August of 1942. Pam, do I have that date right?
The first time, yes, August 21st, 1942, but his capture was in October.
I'm sorry. The plane is shot down in October of 42. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yes.
This is not his plane. I just
Right.
wanted a representative sample.
Right.
Unfortunately, a lot were shot down. So
Yes.
he shot down. What do you recall the mission he was on?
No, I've got it in my notes somewhere. No, I don't. But I know it was over Brest, France, and they were picked up by German fishing boat, and then turned over. And he spent 11 days in the interrogation, and then was sent to Sala Left 3.
Yeah. And here's his email.
Yeah.
Or
Yes.
email.
Telegram.
Yeah.
Yes.
Telegram.
to my grandmother, Maud. Yes.
Yeah. I just we've covered this a few times before. I just can't imagine the family on the receiving end of this and the feelings they go through and the uncertainty that is there.
And it lasted forever. I mean, like I say, we didn't even talk about it. It was.
Yeah. And then here's his prisoner ID card, a little more
Yes.
elaborate than the other one, than
Yes.
Clark's. Okay. So this is where the two of them meet then in Stalag Luft 3.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, is Lieutenant Clark the senior officer, senior American officer at that point?
Yes, yes, he was until Colonel Goodrich was shot down and entered the camp. So he was the senior officer for a good period of time.
Yes.
And that was Colonel Goodrich in the boat with him that you saw on the left. So
really?
we can figure out the date a little bit from when Goodrich got there.
Okay.
Okay.
So how was it that Major Clark and Lieutenant Sconiers became friends? Were they in the same bunkhouse or?
My dad was developing a very complex set of security procedures, and Sconiers became his right-hand person. They worked very closely together, and I believe he trained Sconiers in the coding that had been developed at Fort Hunt. And one of their concerns, in addition to keeping secret all of the tunneling and all of the attempts to escape, they also wanted to make sure that the Germans didn't send in a spy. So every new prisoner that came into the camp went through an interrogation by either my dad or one of the people that he had trained. So he had trained Ewert Sconiers, and he depended very strongly on Ewert, which is another reason that he was so distressed when Ewert died.
Yeah. That's the next part of our story here. Again, this is something Marilyn shared with me. It's a photo, Marilyn, of just an average clinical room, a doctor's
It was
office.
a small clinic. The barracks had small clinics, and there were no doctors that were in there. These were physiotherapists, similar to what a PT would do today. And they also, one of them, I see the one, he pulled my dad's tooth along with a lot of other people. He wasn't a dentist. So they had to work with what they had. And initially, when Lieutenant Sconiers became ill, I'm sure they would have taken him there first before he became very serious to try and evaluate him and work with him. Unfortunately, all they had usually was sulfa powder. They didn't have any antibiotics, which had they had them, it would have saved his life, and he would still be around for a long time. But this is what it looked like, and there was a red light if somebody got ill during the night in the barracks. The senior officer in the barracks would turn that light on. The Germans would come and see how ill the person was, and if it was really serious, would take them out to see German doctors.
And Pam, how is it that Ewert Sconiers became ill? What happened? What's the story?
Well, and I actually was able to meet one of his colleagues who had been a fellow student at the University of Florida with him. They had had breakfast that morning, and this gentleman was in charge of lunch, and he excused himself, and Ewert supposedly went on a walk. And of course, it was cold and icy, I guess. And supposedly he slipped on the ice, and the story is a stick or something went in his ear, and he got a serious infection that later others have said, and we even had a psychological analysis done and so on. He behaved in a very erratic fashion. A lot of people said he was, out of his mind and so on, but it was meningitis is what they presume ultimately took his life.
Okay. And so he's taken from the POW camp and taken where?
And we don't know, Marilyn can elaborate on this as much as anyone. We really don't know exactly if he just died on his own or if he was put to death because of his extreme behavior and so on. But he was taken to what was a mental hospital there in what's now Lublin, Poland. And he was indeed buried in what is now Allies Park, which is basically across the street. And those are fellow prisoners of war there, Lieutenant Colonel Clark at the time, and Lieutenant Stenstrom, Major Wheeler, and Colonel Spivey are a few, along with Padre Mac. And that's
Rich, there's Rich there too.
Yeah, there's several of those pictures that my family had, but they never believed that they were legitimate. They thought they were, propaganda to appease grieving families, and that, if indeed that had happened, someone would know where he was buried. So they just, those were in his keepsakes, and we never questioned it. But sure enough, that was legitimate.
Yeah.
So at the cemetery where he was buried was across the street from the hospital in Lublin, which was several hours away from the camp.
Yes, I had right. And in 2009, I was able to go there and retrace all those steps. And well, I don't know when you want to get into it, but
we're going to get into that, Pam.
Okay.
That's another part of the story that sort of warms us up.
Sure.
So and he died and was buried in early 1944.
Yes, January 27th.
January 27th, 1944. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So I was in Lublin, Germany, later to be Lublin, Poland. So
yes.
Meanwhile, back at the POW camp, there's Lieutenant Colonel Clark. I love this picture because it immediately reminded me of The Great Escape, because they look like they're standing around planning something pretty important, right? So you talked a little bit, Carolyn, about his role with Roger Bushell, right? Bushell,
right.
Who's the famous was it Big X or Mr. Big? What was his?
He was Big X. My dad was known as Big S for security.
I couldn't resist putting his picture up.
Yeah. So my dad was involved in the tunneling, but they decided early on that he was too tall, and that it was too difficult getting him through the tunneling. So he concentrated on making sure that the Germans did not discover what they were doing.
So this is Roger Bushell from The Great Escape, right?
Wow.
And this is him in real life. And I think I misspelled his name. Sorry, Roger. So your father knew Roger Bushell and worked with him, right? But
he admired him. He deeply admired Roger Bushell. He thought he was one of the finest, most intelligent men he'd ever met.
He was a lawyer, even before he got to camp.
But by the time the British affect the Great Escape, the Americans have been removed from that part of the camp.
Right. My dad always suspected very strongly that some British prisoner had whispered to one of the German guards that it was only the Americans who were doing the digging. And at that, the Germans separated the Americans, put all the Americans in a separate camp. And that saved my father's life, because he would have been number 11 to go out on the escape.
That's amazing. Wow.
Okay. I stopped the share in the PowerPoint for a bit because I'd like to check on questions that might be in the chat, or kind of a natural breaking point in the story here. Are there questions from the audience?
Well, one question here from, I had it and it bounced down. There it is. I may have missed this earlier from Scott Masters. What is the source of the photos from the Stalag?
The ones that you've showed tonight, a lot of them are, some of them are it depends what it is. Anything from the camp, it was either from a clandestine camera, Or frequently the Germans, if you see group photos, the Germans took those, it's kind of propaganda. And they knew, and they made copies of those pictures for the prisoners to send back to their families. And
But
they
most
put
of
them in a
the
newspaper.
most of the pictures were taken with clandestine cameras that were smuggled in, buried, for example, in tins of powdered milk. There were a lot of other ways that they smuggled in clandestine materials to make compasses and cameras, and the POWs hid them in the heels of their boots. They hollowed out the heels, and they carried the film in the heels of their boots.
Wow.
Does that answer the question for whoever posed that?
For Scott.
Okay.
Also, further up in the chat, there was a couple just comments. Tom Polish says that his father was a B-17 tail gunner and was shot down, wounded, evaded, and eventually captured. Spent 14 months in Stalag 17. He was the national commander of the American ex-POW in the late 1970s. Nancy Putnam, welcome back, Nancy. You said your father was 100th Bomb Group pilot, shot down in Berlin mission in March 44, imprisoned in Stalag Luft 1 for the duration. And there was also one other person who, let's see here. One second. Tom, you also had mentioned that your dad's friend and waist gunner ended up in Stalag Luft 1. He wrote a book called POW number 3959. I put the link in the chat to that book if anybody is interested in checking that out. And Pat Hughes, I unmuted you because you had a long comment here. I thought you might want to mention it.
Well, I just wanted to share with the audience that that camp was redesignated after the war as named Camp King in Oberursel, and I was assigned there as a movement control officer for the movement control agency under 8th Army, and spent about 3 years there. And I think it's interesting to note that that's a very small camp. I was intrigued by the history of it, although I must admit, during the time I was there, I was not aware of this amount of history. All I could tell you is that two of the waiters and manager of the officers club told me they worked there underneath the Nazi regime, and there was a swastika carved into the main beam in the dining room and bar area, which I felt was, historic. And luckily, although I understand now they've converted Camp King into a civilian housing area, and that may not even be there anymore. I went back there after I served my tour, and but I really never got to be able to go on to look at the
referring to Stalag Luft 3?
Right, yes, at Oberursel.
No, that was not Stalag Luft 3. That was Dulag Luft, where you were at Camp King. That's where the interrogations were, yeah. And one of the main roads, I've been back there, one of the main roads leading in is Elvis Presley Boulevard. So I don't know if it was that when you were there or not.
No.
I don't know at what point it got that name.
Yeah, I had to go. I was assigned there, but I was billeted in Gibbs Kaserne in Frankfurt, close to the 95th General Hospital there. And but Camp King was a very small, and that town, Oberursel, I never met a pomfret or a schnitzel I didn't like in that town. I could say that. And that's probably where they went. There's a lot of nice little bars and stuff. It was wonderful.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Another question, don't have a name, but where did they get the dresses?
Some of the costumes they got from Berlin. They got paid in German money, very little money, for being prisoners of war, but they could put it all together, and all they could do with the money is to buy magazines or things for the theater. So sometimes the more elaborate costumes, the Germans helped them get them from Berlin, a theater there. And they had a lot of men in the camp that could sew things, and they could take any kind of cloth they were able to get and make costumes as well. And some of them were pretty elaborate. They had some really talented people. General Clark said at one time there were so many different jobs that people did, whatever you needed to do. They had wig makers that were shot down, and they worked with the theater groups. Anything you wanted, there was somebody in the camp that could do it.
All that was used to affect the Great Escape, to put them
Yeah.
into
Right, right. They were
civilian
able
clothes.
to sew uniforms and things that the POWs could wear after they got out of the camp to hide among the civilian populace.
Yeah.
This has become a running theme I've noticed. The next question over the last several weeks is, any of you three ladies can comment on your opinion on Hogan's Heroes, and did you watch it?
I watched it and I laughed about it.
I watched it.
What did
It
your fathers think of it?
Well, I don't remember that and I watched it long before I ever read my father's book, and long before he talked about his experience. He was very guarded because he felt that many of the things that happened in the camp should remain secret in case they ever needed, POWs in the future ever needed to know some of the secret things that they did. Of course, that's in Vietnam, that was there was no hope there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I see a question about the theater. Someone had asked me.
Yeah, Marilyn, why didn't they include the theater part in Masters of the Air?
It was mostly time. I was hoping they would. I sent them so much material, and so many things happened in those theaters. There were so many good stories that came out of the theaters, and I was hoping somehow they could work that in. And I think they wrote a lot of scripts. They discarded a lot. And as Carolyn found out, the actor that played her dad, they had filmed him in a lot of scenes, and that all got cut. Other actors, she said,
He was very disappointed.
Yeah.
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 He sent me
Yeah.
An email afterwards and said how honored he'd been to play my dad, but he had been very disappointed at how many scenes that were cut.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the other reason was there were 6 compounds in the class. One Balearic was in the whole camp, rather. And the Germans allowed the men to build their own theater in each compound. And they were having a hard time trying to figure out how to account for all these many compounds, because at one time Buck Clevin was in one, Bucky was in the other one, Egan. And it became so complicated, they made it just one big compound. And so that would just be one theater, but the stories that came out of the theater would really need a lot more attention than they could give it to really make it a good story and enjoyable. And it had to tie in with their characters. Everything did.
So let me ask this, and then we'll take our station break, Sean. For each of the three of you, of our guests, just 1 or 2 sentences on your thoughts about the Masters of the Air television series.
Hi there, I'm Cortana.
Oh,
and
I'm sorry.
Pamela, any thoughts on the Apple TV series?
Well, I thought it was very powerful, and my husband and I were glued to every single one of them. It was quite powerful. I enjoyed it, and I know that there were a lot of things that could have been more accurate, but nonetheless it was quite powerful.
There was a fairly lengthy review in the Washington Post after the 2nd episode aired, and it was very negative. It angered me, and my husband and I worked together on a letter refuting her concerns. One of the things that I pointed out when she talked about how crowded, how she was not able to follow the action in the cockpit. I pointed out that the action in the cockpit, the crowding was exactly the way it happened, and that not only were they having difficulties, but that it was showing exactly what happened. At any rate, my letter ended up being published, and there were some close to 40 comments online in response to my letter. Very positive comments about the show.
That's
However,
great.
I was a little bit disappointed myself because I thought they didn't spend enough time on Solid Glove 3, and some of the things that they showed were kind of lost in the action.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, next week we can all throw eggs at John Orloff. Well, at least verbally. So, Marilyn, I know this is a loaded question for you, Marilyn.
Yes, it is.
I got to give you only 1 minute.
I know I have to be brief. It's probably harder for me because I did work on it. And at the same time, I knew all the true stories. I knew how they happened. I knew who was involved in those stories. And as filmmakers have a poetic license, they can do what they want with it to suit their own needs and their own characters. So as I watched it, I found myself saying, no, it didn't happen like that. It didn't, no. But it had to match what their characters were involved in. And as they would say, what you saw, including the Rosseltheim massacre, that happened, but it didn't happen to anybody in the 100th Bomb Group. But they wanted to show the violence that could happen to prisoners of war, for instance, and that's exactly true what happened there. So sometimes it was just little things that I found, and sometimes were major, particularly towards the end in Liberation. There were a lot of liberties taken there at the end. And I get emails from tons of children of POWs. We still call ourselves children. In our little family, but they said, when did our dads didn't go to Nuremberg? That was a big change. And I get a lot of emails about that. They said, did I miss something? Did our dads go to Nuremberg? Well, no, only West Compound went to Nuremberg from Stalag Luft 3 and the infirm that showed up later from the camp. So I'm probably more biased than most people.
Well, you have more knowledge than most people.
So yeah, but the CGI films that, like I say, the battles, they were right on. Like Carolyn said, that's what the cockpits were like. That's how violent it was. That's how terrible the injuries were. How you had to bail out and get it right the first time. No training with a parachute. That was all very, very accurate. And the missions were researched well. I know one of the researchers said, and other than sometimes there were some other models of B-17s in there that they didn't show. And I think even a B-24.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a hard one to ask that.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be difficult, Marilyn.
Yep.
But your knowledge is much appreciated. Sean, why don't we take that station break and then we'll get to the end of the story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Glenn. Thank you to our guests tonight. And we also want to thank our sponsors for this program. First up is tobacco-free Adagio Health. They've been supporting us for quite some time, and they are dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about tobacco hazards, and advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. You can find out everything that they have to offer at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. That includes classes, nicotine replacement therapy, a popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. Also, we would like to thank UPMC for Life. They can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC for Life has plans designed for veterans by veterans that can save you money and get you more benefits. You can view all their plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. Thank you both, UPMC for Life and Tobacco Free Adagio Health, for sponsoring the VBC. This is our current issue of the VBC magazine. I have mine right here. It comes in the mail if we have your address. So if you haven't received one yet, it's because we don't have it. So please email that to Todd or myself, and we will make sure to get you on the mailing list. This is a free quarterly magazine, and it's quite excellent. I was just talking to Brad in the chat saying I'm watching this documentary called Turning Point, From the Bomb to the Cold War on Netflix. It's fantastic. And it will have one of our upcoming guests in a future Monday Night Scuttlebutt. Brian Morrow will be joining us for a second tour to talk. And I just passed his episode where that episode focused in on 1983. So you can read the article, check out the Netflix series. It's very well written front to back. It has upcoming programs in this magazine of what we have going on with VBC. And you don't want to miss out. be honest. Survey, we always put the survey in the chat. We just like to know what you think of the program tonight, how we can do better, or if you're just enjoying yourself, that's great. We want to hear any and all comments. We look at these very closely to help us shape our programming. And if you think, hey, BBC hasn't covered this, please send it our way. We will be happy to fashion a scuttlebutt or maybe a Greatest Generation Live around the topic that you suggest. So I will put the link to that survey into the chat. Upcoming for BBC. Maybe we'll get to the trip now, or do you want to get to that later?
No, that's fine. I think we've been real pleased with the response. We now have 20 people committed and another 4 or 5 about to commit. So I think we're going to have a group of between 25 and 30 accompanying us to England with Ed Cottrell, who could not be on tonight. He's traveling, 102 years old. He travels more than I do.
Wow.
And we're looking forward to this, and there's still room for more. If anybody's interested, just go to our website.
Go to the website, look at events, and then on there you'll find the Masters of the Air tour that we will be conducting later this year. Upcoming, just like Glenn mentioned, John Orloff next Thursday night. I don't put next Monday because we are off on Monday night. So please don't come to the Zoom room Monday night. Todd and Glenn and myself, we get a night off. Todd was gracious enough to say, take a day. But we'll be back Thursday night with John Orloff. He had to cancel on us the first time because the Master of the Air had just come out. He was a bit busy, but we're so grateful that he said, hey, I'll come back and come on. Overall, the response from our VBC members and us has been overwhelmingly positive, so we are very excited to talk with him about the series next Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Then following Monday night, April 22nd, is our return of our VBC Jeopardy night. I think Todd's keeping the teams pretty close to the vest, but it is a fun night. It is a fun night of trivia. There's fisticuffs. It's a grand time because I'm sure as non-veterans ourselves, we sometimes get things wrong in the Jeopardy, and that causes a really fun time in the chat. So make sure you join us. I don't think over the many years that Alex Trebek was on there, I don't know if he ever made a mistake. The guy was probably the only like a pitcher. Like he threw a perfect game for his entire career. It's incredible. Can't say we'll do the same, but join us for all of the upcoming wonderful programs we have coming up for BBC. And I'll throw that link for the survey here into the chat. Thank you all.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for everybody staying with us. And I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. I'm going to skip a few of the slides that I had originally and a little bit of the story just because the time frames involved. So into the war comes, and this is one of the great joyous pictures of the POWs being liberated.
Wow.
Yeah, this is after the march, of course, that occurred.
Right.
We're just not going to have time to get into tonight. This was at where, Marilyn? Is this Moosburg?
Yeah, this is Moosburg, and I know the man on the left and the man on the right, and Carolyn does too, I'm sure.
Yeah, my father's right in the middle there.
Yeah. And he was, when he was later superintendent at the Air Force Academy, then Moose Stillman on the right was his commandant of cadets, right, at the same time.
This fellow right here, sort of leaning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's got to be powerful to actually know people in this.
The man on the right, and I don't recall his name right now, is the one that General Clark took a lot of pictures of liberation. And he told me once, he said when they were coming through the gates after they were liberated, he said, get out there with your camera because you're going to want to film this. And we're so glad he said that, because look at all the pictures we have now that we've used. And he took most of those pictures. Although along the way, Patton's Third Army broke into a couple of German camera factories and liberated a few cameras and passed them out when it got in the camp. So that's where a lot of them came from.
Sorry here. So the war ends, and Lieutenant Colonel Clark stays in the U.S. Army Air Force, becomes the Army Air Force. And I just love this picture that Marilyn sent me, because this is a reunion. I would imagine, what, in the late 40s?
I think that was in 46. It could have been 47. I think the first one was in 46 in
Yeah.
Dayton. But there's General Clark and there's my dad in the same picture.
Mm.
Oh, wow.
This is General Clark right here, I'm
Right
guessing?
there, yeah.
Yeah, where you see that black line coming down right above his head, and you look over the other black line coming down, that's my dad.
This, am I circling?
Wow.
No?
Wow.
Next to him, right there. Yeah,
Okay, here we go.
that's my dad.
That's got to be special.
It
Wow.
is. It
Right.
is. He had, I have to say, he had tremendous respect for General Clark. He talked about him. I grew up hearing the name long before I knew Carolyn or him. And he said what a rock he was to all those men in the camp. And when I talked to him out at the academy, he had expressed to me that he was disappointed he had gone down on his first mission. But I said, you know, you got put in the right place, because if it wasn't for you, as the leadership he had of men, he was a leader of men, and he kept a lot of those men going through some tough times. So he really served his purpose, but just a different way, as far as I'm concerned. He was a wonderful man.
Here he is as a 3-star general, and he is the superintendent of the Air Force Academy at this point.
Yeah.
Great
He's
picture.
good
Do
here.
you recall the years that he was the superintendent? That would have been in the 90s, early 2000s?
No, it was in the 70s.
70s. Oh, wow.
Yeah, 1970 to 1974.
Okay.
But he stayed in Colorado Springs after that, and served on the board of the Air Force Academy Library, and helped put together the largest and best collection of POW and World War II memorabilia in the Air Force Academy Library.
Mhm.
Wow. Wow.
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now let's come to Pamela's story about finding
No,
Oh,
that
there's
there it
my
is.
dad's writing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
so Pam, remind me, because I saw the documentary, when did you get involved and when did you begin to understand Ewart Sconier's story and the mystery involved in it as to where his remains were?
It was exactly 66 years to the day that Uncle Ewart was captured that I was in the bookstore and found the picture of the plane that he had successfully returned to England in August. And when I came home that evening and Googled his name, there were 2 shocking posts. One was from an American there in what was then now Lublin, Poland, with a picture of a rock monument in the park with my uncle's name on it. And he was inquiring as to, did anyone know anything about that? And there was a post from a Polish fellow, Szymon Swartka, who also had posted an inquiry. And of course, needless to say, I was quite shocked and immediately emailed both of them. And a few days later, I came to my house and found a telephone message from a lady saying that the Pentagon had given her permission to contact me about my uncle. I'm getting chills just recalling that. And as I say, that's when the screaming began.
It did.
It was Marilyn, and she had, of course, had this wonderful relationship with General Clark, and he had asked her during a visit she had with him if he knew what had happened to Sconiers, and of course she didn't. But she was also working at the time with John Gray, who was new with DPMO at the time, and he was the lead researcher on my uncle's case and had reopened it, and he was working with Shimon. And so Meryl, because I was kind of coming in the back door, they gave her permission to give me a call. And I went thereafter to my first family update meeting in Miami, Florida in January of that year. And I have to pause and honor my pledge that I gave at that time, because were it not for America's incredible commitment to its service personnel and to what was then DPMO and JPAC, now it's DPAA, and General Kelly McCaig, Colonel Johnny Webb, Dr. Tom Holland at the lab, and Chief John Gray, all with DPAA. I wouldn't be here today telling the story, 80 years later after my uncle's death. And it was Marilyn who became not only my guide over 10 years, along with this international team that formed that we call Ewart's Army.
Yeah, that's our.
But it was Marilyn who ultimately found where they had moved my uncle. Indeed, they had buried him as the pictures indicated. But after the war, America was not allowed to come in and remove their prisoners of war, but the French were. And they moved Ewart as they were moving, I think it was 4 or 5 of their own POWs who had been buried next to him. And he was buried in Gdansk in a French military cemetery.
Let me pause for a second there, Pam.
Sure.
So this particular note from General Clark is something that he gave Marilyn.
Yes, and it was out telling from his memory where Ewart had been buried when, he was part of the burial team there that day. And so that was his sketch for Marilyn.
This was that spot we saw the photos of him being
Yes.
And this was where? Where was this?
It's in Lubin, what is now Lubin, Lubin, Poland, and it's what is now Allies Park. It had been a huge cemetery across the street from the mental hospital that where he was taken, and there it is. And but of course now all of the headstones and crosses and any indication of a grave were replaced by a park.
The communists did that. The communists took over there, so they ruined the park.
Yes. And so, in fact, I can remember vividly going there, and I can remember Shimon and John pacing based on the sketch that Marilyn had shown them, trying to figure out exactly where in the park he would have been buried. And it was
based on this sketch.
Yes. Yes.
Very accurate. His memory was perfect.
And he had referenced a metal gate, and that became Marilyn's quest for 10 years. She would periodically go online and search for old pictures of the cemetery and the gate. And on August 21st in 2015, while a DPAA mission was going on with Dr. Jared Burks of Ohio Valley Archaeology, was digging in the old area where he had done radar survey and everything, and where he thought Ewart had been buried originally. Marilyn was looking one more time online to try to find a picture of that gate to help Jared. And so on the anniversary of Ewart's heroic flight, Marilyn comes across a picture of a cross and they used Ewart's name. His middle name was Theodore, and he was known more as Ed or Edward than he was known as Ewart. And Marilyn saw that. I was in Panama City at the time for my 50th high school reunion, and she told me I needed to get to a computer pretty fast. And Shimon verified that indeed he was there, of course, still in Poland. And I contacted him immediately, and we needed to know, was this legitimate? And it certainly was. A gentleman named Adam Gass had taken that picture in May of 2015, posted it to Billion Graves on July 11th, and she found it August 21st. Yeah. And after that, it was, of course, a matter of DPAA agreeing to another mission to recover his remains. And then, of course, the DNA process, which I encourage as all families of the missing to get their DNA samples on file.
So let's back up just a moment here with
sure.
So originally, you're searching here where General Clark had his had map.
Yes.
And we thought Sconiers was buried here.
No, that's where he was buried, right there.
He was buried there, and JPAC did an exploratory mission there in 2011, and then Dr. Burks went on his own. We had support from all kinds of people, including DHL Shipping, for him to go over and conduct a radar survey of the area. And he found enough information, enough evidence that he was able to convince Dr. Holland and Johnny Webb that, it was legitimate to go there and search. So his mission, they assigned him an official mission in August 5th through the 29th in 2015 to begin excavating the area where Ewart was originally buried. And they did find remains. And in fact, there seemed to be remains on top of remains.
Right.
But
not,
as we,
not,
but not,
Conyers.
no, he was keeping me informed every day, and Marilyn as well, of what they were finding. And it was getting more and more discouraging that indeed, someone that would have fit Ewart's description was there. And meanwhile, Marilyn was doing her little search and found this cross with his.
The day that I found him, this is the picture that came up.
Yes.
I had just put his name into a search engine, as I had many times, funerals, his name, everything.
For years.
And I had used findagrave.com. And I thought, I'm going to try this one more time, because I got an email from the archaeologist saying, did you find out where that gate was? And I said, no, but I'll try right now. I'm going to try one more time and find it. And when I typed it in, this billiongraves.com came up. I'd never heard of them before.
Yeah.
And when it came up, to the right of the screen was this cross and that green map of the French military cemetery that you've been showing just previous to this. Mm-hmm. And not only did it come up, that red arrow said exactly what grave he was in. You see that red arrow? Oh. And you notice on his cross as well, all the French crosses say he died for France. It said that in French, but it didn't on this cross. It just gives the dates of the war. They knew that he wasn't French when they buried him there.
So they thought he might be Belgium. They thought he might be
At first they did. Yeah, at first they thought he could be Belgian. And then
that's when we got our wizard Ed, he was one of the key members of our team and in Brussels. And he was interfacing with the Belgian government and the French to determine that there was no Ewart Scaniers that served with either of them.
Yeah. And they were still digging. And as soon as that came up, I was so stunned when I saw it.
Yeah.
I emailed him back, stop digging. You're in the wrong cemetery.
So it's not there. From the original burial ground to this burial ground. How did that happen?
The French moved him. There were French prisoners of war who were also buried next to Ewart. And when the Russians permitted them to come and retrieve their fallen, and they graciously took Ewart when they took their own.
Yeah. And we missed a clue early on when I was at the academy talking to General Clark. We were going over the burial pictures, and he said, these little white crosses here, these are all French. And I thought, well, they always bury them together in the back. And we missed the significance of those crosses being French prisoners of war. And that's how they ended up here. He ended up with them because his name sounds a little French too.
Yeah,
so they were counting, but they didn't. Yeah. They took him just in case because they knew nobody else was good. The communists weren't going to let anybody else back in, so they took a chance and they took him along.
So what do those dates mean?
When the war started and when it finished. Started in 1939.
World War II.
They had no idea when he died. They just assumed that he died sometime during that period of time.
Mm-hmm. I think it might be on all those crosses, if I'm not mistaken. It was just something they do in a military cemetery, maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it shows the end of in 1945.
Yeah.
And Pam has that. They sent her that nameplate there on. There it is. Yeah.
There it is.
And she brought it to my house when she let me hold it.
And then joyous.
I love this picture. This is one of my favorites.
Oh. Yes.
Joyous return to what's the name of the hometown in Florida?
His hometown. He, of course, could have been buried at Arlington, but I have 70-something letters that he wrote home. And in almost every one, he was talking about returning home and missing, his hometown and what he and my dad were going to do in terms of their future together. Defuniak Springs, Florida. It's just a little bit from the coast of the Panhandle there, in the Gulf Coast in Northwest Florida. And in fact, the home, my grandmother's home, this is another thing I did not know, Ewart's widow purchased that home for my grandmother with her benefit, with this insurance benefit.
Wow.
And I did not know that. My family lost touch with her, and I was able to locate her and tell her that his case had been reopened. And in fact, you know, I'll take a minute to say the moment I was there leading up to, I was getting her story and she was telling me about the day she had gotten the news. And I looked at her and I said, what would you say if I told you that the government had reopened his case? And this beautiful, frail, elderly woman, her fist, she looked at me, she said, I would say it's a lie. I know what happened to him. He was shot and thrown in a mass grave. And I got up and moved over to her chair and started showing her all of the government information that I had retrieved. And her face, I'll never forget the transition and the tears. You know, she had waited 11 years to remarry. She had she and her husband were pharmacists there in Pensacola, Florida. And they had 5 incredible daughters who are cousins by choice to me now, and who shared the journey in every possible way. My dream was for General Clark to take Babel to greet Ewart as he came off the plane. That was my dream. And of course, unfortunately, both of them passed before that happened, but she knew that the end was near. So she was very grateful. She said, you've ended a 60-year nightmare.
And Carolyn was in that picture you showed at the funeral.
Yes. And as the military told me, they had never experienced anything like this, that 4 descendants of the original burial group were there, and they stood in the exact same place as their father, or in the case of Scott Spivey, his grandfather, Colonel Delmar Spivey.
Yeah. You can see Carolyn on the left there.
Yes. Yeah.
And these were all friends of mine for years and years. Carolyn and I met later, probably but I knew the rest of them for years. So when this all came up, they were just kind of at my fingertips to find them, because I'd known them for a long time, but I never dreamed they would do anything like this. You know,
that was the most powerful moment of the whole thing to me. It was just incredible.
Yeah.
And that is his grave.
What a wonderful, wonderful tear-jerking story. I really encourage everybody to watch the documentary Finding Sconiers, right?
Yes, Finding Sconiers on YouTube. Yes.
On YouTube. Easy to find. Just type that in, search, comes right up. And again, it won awards for its, I would say, for its emotionality. Its story is just a wonderful story.
75th anniversary of D-Day. There were 50 other submissions, and ours won.
Yeah.
That one won. We were really, really thrilled about that.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of our program. Can we answer any other questions from the audience? Anybody like to raise their hand or anything in the chat, Sean?
Nothing in the chat. I'll take a look around the windows here. If anybody's waving their hand in front of their camera, I'm happy to unmute you.
I just want to recognize, I see a few faces. Nancy Putman, I don't see your face, but I see your name. Thank you for being on. And I see Jim Blakely. Jim, hello. Thank you. Jim is going to be on in a couple weeks' time with a couple of other family members to tell their story. And then Nancy is going to be on, I think, in 3 or 4 weeks' time. I can't remember exactly, with some other families from the 100th Bomb Group. So we've got plenty more programming. I just hope everybody continues to listen in. These are all fascinating stories. Marilyn has introduced me to 4 other POW families, children of POWs, buddy. And I'd like to have a program on each one of them alone, but just not enough time. But we are going to do a couple of future programs with these other people as well. I've talked to all of them with Marilyn, and they're all fascinating stories. Each one different, each one very different.
Yeah, they are. I think one thing that Pam and I learned with working with DPAA that we didn't know, there's 78,000 MIAs in Europe from World War II. And I think it's about, is it 35,000 considered to be recoverable.
Yes.
And we're the
Yes.
only country that brings our war dead home. When the British fought, they were buried where they fell. But the Americans, we always bring our war dead home. And even after all these years, even considering that high number, it's a staggering number. But even the Europeans are helping out now. If they find a plane wreck somewhere or metals or bones or whatever they find, they get in touch with DPAA and give them assistance as well to bring more of them home.
So repeat
And
that.
DPAA's plea is for the families to join in at their monthly family update meetings, which are held regularly and regionally throughout each year, and then to also get their DNA samples in.
Repeat that number again, Marilyn. There's how many?
78,000
Yes.
still missing from World War II. That's Americans missing.
Yes.
From
and
World War
Europe.
II, not
Yes.
including World War One.
Right.
It's World War II.
78,000.
Yes.
And they're not all recoverable.
Yeah.
But they keep track. And in the beautiful our American cemeteries over there, there's a little rosette they put for the missing where they know they died during the war, but they're not sure where they are. And Skyers was one of them. And when they found him, or we brought him back, they take the rosette off that and they say, here's one that we found. All the American cemeteries do that over there.
Yeah. I mean, again, in that documentary, they go into great detail and show a lot of the people you mentioned, Pamela, from
Yes.
the department that finds these missing.
Yes.
Right. It's a wonderful, wonderful, and what's the term that is used so often? They leave no man behind.
Exactly. It's true.
Yeah.
And when he flew into Panama City, we all went down and we hadn't mentioned all the motorcycle riders, the freedom riders.
Oh gosh.
That line was so long, motorcycles escorting.
From Pensacola into Defuniak Springs.
Yeah.
It
And
was
they
100
just shut down
miles.
the
Yep.
whole town in Defuniak.
Yeah.
And I remember standing with Pam after all these years and we saw that flag covered casket come off the plane and all the men, I still get chills, standing at attention in military uniform. And even the airlines have protocol how they do that. And they kept all the passengers on the plane until he was taken off. And the pilot explained what happened and who they had aboard. And it was just unbelievable to see it. And we saw that casket coming down and that was something fun it paid me.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the bracelet that John
Yeah.
Gray, the chief researcher, had been given before he even knew I existed. He was wearing this. And of course, the day of Ewert's funeral, which was the same date as his original funeral, he gave it to me, which of course he had told me, when we find him, it's yours. And that was the day, 74 years later to the day.
Yeah, 74 years. And I'm wearing my Catalpa necklace you gave me.
Yes.
That's a whole story about the Catalpa trip we didn't get into. But
Yeah, there's so many details in
Oh,
this.
so
I'm trying to finish a memoir about it and
Oh, great.
to have
Well,
everything.
listen,
Yeah.
we need to wrap up. Unless there's any last minute questions, we're going to say goodbye and thank our guests. Anything else, John?
Just Carol asking what was next week about again. That is John Orloff, the screenwriter for Masters of the Air. So be sure to be here Thursday night, 7 p.m.
Yeah, he really was. I think Marilyn would agree with this from everything I've read about him. And I did talk to him once back a few months ago. He really was the man who made Masters of the Air happen over a 10 or 12-year time frame, right, Marilyn?
the third part of the trilogy, Band of Brothers, and the Pacific, then this. And there was one funny thing that happened when they put me in touch with him originally. They said, okay, John Orloff's going to call you. And he did. And he introduced himself. And he said, our main problem we have here is we have no idea what prisoners of war do all day long. They're behind barbed wire. What do they do? It's because they had to have some substance to write about. And I was just kind of thinking out loud for a minute. And I said, mainly they were really pretty bored a lot of the time. And there was just this long pause. And he said, but Marilyn, boredom doesn't sell. So
Guys dressed up as girls sell, right?
Yeah.
That's
So
how
I
it works.
assured him that they did a lot. They tunneled, they did a lot of things. And I was going to tell him a lot of things, but he was just stunned that he had to write about something.
Yeah.
So I said,
Yeah,
I can give you a lot to write about.
They also produced incredible passports and IDs
Oh,
and uniforms for the prisoners to wear when they got out. So
yeah.
they spent a lot of time, some of it at night, so they wouldn't be discovered. But yes, and
They put on
building
plays.
cameras but they made cameras, they
Yeah.
made compasses, they made radios, they built radios. It's amazing what they accomplished.
Yeah.
Um,
And people don't realize either that a lot of Glenn Miller's musicians and Benny Goodman and all the big band era, those men flew in the war and got shot down. So by the time they got to Stalag Luft 3, they had an incredible musical groups to draw from, all kinds of music, and to put on plays. And at Christmas one year, they did the Messiah, and even the German guards stood out in the cold, looking through the theater windows with tears running down their faces, listening to the Messiah, because they didn't want to be there either. They wanted to be home just like our prisoners did. And the theaters weren't heated. They just came in everything they could wear, blankets, they could see their breath when they put on these performances. And the commandant came, and the German officers, they came to the plays.
Yeah.
And a lot of, since they flew out of England, there were several cases where a man who was going to fly that day, not knowing he was going to be shot down, bought theater tickets in London. He got shot down, and he got to Stalag Luft 3, and they were putting on the same play. So he showed his
paid
tickets.
himself a couple of
So the
times.
tickets went in. Yeah. He said it was a
Listen.
surreal experience.
We need to wrap up. It's time
do.
to stop. We could go on for another hour, I'm sure.
Oh, we could.
But,
Yeah.
let me thank all of our audience that tuned in tonight. Sean, thank you for your stellar performance as always.
Thank you.
Pam, thank you. Carolyn, thank you. Marilyn, for
Thank
sharing
you.
wonderful stories with us.
Thank you so much. We
Thank
appreciate
Our
you.
pleasure.
Okay.
Our
Thanks,
pleasure.
everybody. See you
Thank
next
you,
week.
everyone. We'll see you next
Yeah.
Thursday.
All right. Good night.